I'm Lio Convoy, and welcome to my first presentation at Iconicon Online. I hope you've been enjoying this virtual convention so far. Today we'll be walking you through the creation and timeline of the ThunderCats property. This is not going to be all-inclusive, but we'll give you a general rundown of the property, how it began, how it goes through time, and where it currently is. So, as Moltar would say,
sit back and relax. It's ThunderCat time.
I can feel dark powers. The Eye of Thundera. It is your destiny that you hold in your hand. Bring it to me! Thunder! ThunderCats! I will always be with you, Lionel.
Our story starts in the early 1980s, where World War II veteran and inventor Ted Wolfe shows his sketches to his daughter of an idea he called ThunderCats. From there, it went to Ted Wolfe's friend and marketing connection, Stan Weston. Later on, Stan was meeting with Rankin-Boss to pitch a completely different series. Rankin-Boss had no previous involvement with the merchandising world, so Stan and Leisure Concepts were a good choice to introduce them. We don't know what concept was being pitched at the time, but it was apparently pretty boring. They were looking for a concept to make into a syndicated series, and something from Stan's portfolio caught the eye of Lee Danicher, Rankin-Boss's producer. She found Ted Wolfe's original ThunderCats designs and became enthralled with them. And despite Jules Bass, who wasn't a fan of cats, teasing Lee that she only liked the images because she likes cats, the meeting quickly switched to discussing this ThunderCats idea. Arthur Rankin and Jules Bass concluding, "This is it," about the idea. Production for the show started in early 1984. Arthur contacted and contracted his longtime friend Leonard Starr to write a show bible, do character profiles, and write the opening of the series. Rankin-Boss had previously had their traditional animated films like The Hobbit done by Studio Topcraft. However, Topcraft had since split into two studios, one becoming Studio Ghibli and the other becoming Pacific Animation Corporation. The latter was headed by Masaki Izuka and was their pick for the animation studio to head this project. This would ensure that ThunderCats had a very unique design and animation style, as it was 100% animated in Japan. There was a lot of tweaking between initial concept though to final product. You can see from the initial designs of Lion-O to the final, and especially in things like Leonard's initial concept for the Cat's Lair to the final. Even the key weapon of the series, the Sword of Omens, was drastically changed in the final product by Pacific Animation Corporation. From a single-handed arming sword with eye holes in the hilt, to what you see today, a longsword. So if you've ever wondered why Jaga says this,
And these are not merely holes you see in the hilt. Looking through those magic apertures will give you sight beyond sight.
it's because the initial concepts had them. Let's go back to Leonard Starr for a minute, though. You know all that iconic stuff about ThunderCats? The lore of Thundera, Third Earth, Mumra, all of that? That was Leonard Starr's work. The man had a very solid understanding of the fantasy and sci-fi genre. Taking a cue from Tolkien, he eventually drew up the initial map of Third Earth. Rankin-Boss wanted to make a good cartoon for kids that taught pro-social values. To make sure this was accomplished, scripts were read over and checked by child psychologist Dr. Robert Coesis. This was to make sure proper values were taught in the scripts themselves and that no harmful lessons were being taught. Unlike some of the other cartoons at the time, the moral lessons in ThunderCats weren't reiterated at the end of an episode in its own segment. Not that other cartoons that did that at the time were bad, it was just a creative choice to make the writing of the show stand out. A booklet on the morals and values of the episodes were handed out in some schools at the time too. There were 40,000 schools that the studio partnered with to create homework lessons where students would extrapolate the values of the episodes as an assignment. This helped to not only advertise the show in a unique way, but also helped to try and immunize it against some of the flatly stupid criticism action cartoons were getting at the time. The first season totaled in 65 episodes and $15 million to produce. That would be $38 million in today's money. The series premiered on January 23, 1985. Showing the first 4 episodes as a complete movie called Exodus. This uncut movie format can still be found on VHS, as it's never had a DVD release. While the pilot movie premiered in January, the series started airing for syndication on September 9th of 1985. And it was successful. It was a top-rated show between 1985 and 1986. It employed several unique writers and voice actors that brought the stories and characters to life in their own ways. for better or for worse. The toy line for the series was done by LJN, though there were obviously contractions outside of the United States, such as Rainbow Toys and other companies, and was vastly different than other toy lines at the time in both scale and build, even towering over the then champion toy at the time, He-Man. One of the more interesting facets about ThunderCats compared to some 80s cartoons is that it wasn't prompted by, nor any writing mandated for, the toy line that accompanied it. An older video I did highlights it in more detail, but the reason why ThunderCats toyed with so many concepts and story beats with unique characters and settings was because it wasn't married to the toy line. It only really utilized anything related to the toys themselves when the writers thought it was neat. The biggest indicator of this is the design change of the Berserkers for Season 2. This is because the toy line made them look more uniform and gave that crew specific powers that led to neat action scenes. The Mutant Fist Pounder is also an example of this. This is also why so many one-shot characters got toys like Safari Joe, Mongor, and the Tuska Warrior, whereas more common characters like the Lunatacs, Snarfer, and even the Warrior Maidens never got any toys, with only one prototype of the Lunatacs team member, Red Eye, even existing. It's also why you never saw the Laser Sabers, Thunderwing, Stilt Runner, or Luna Lasher in the show, with some of them only showing up in the UK comics. So yeah, ThunderCats wasn't made to sell toys. It was made to tell good stories that taught kids lessons. Anyone that tries to say otherwise is ignorant or stupid. Now, if I were to ask you what the longest running ThunderCats property is, you'd probably tell me it was the original cartoon that ran from 1985 to 1988. But you'd actually be wrong. The longest running ThunderCats property was the supplemental comic. While initially part of the US Marvel comic run under their Star imprint, lasting only 24 issues, it was expanded in the Marvel UK run. It ran from 1985 to 1991 between the two of them, with a total of 129 issues in the finished UK run. This comic line also included hardback yearly annuals and had supplemental text stories along with the comics themselves that expand on the lore. To this day, neither the US or UK runs have been completely collected in a modern format. ThunderCats was followed by two sister shows. The first was Silverhawks, and the other was the comic strip, mostly singling out tiger sharks. They won't be expanded on here, but I figured it was best to include them. After the initial run, the Ronkin Boss library eventually got bought by Warner Brothers, that still owns the property today. Warner Brothers utilized ThunderCats as the introduction show for their new and now legendary action block on Cartoon Network called Toonami. Premiering on March 17, 1997, Toonami was led up to by marathons on the previous weekend of Cartoon Network action favorites like Super Friends and SWAT Kats The Radical Squadron.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Tonight at 7 on Toonami.
The block was a massive success and eventually paved the way to make anime mainstream in the US. ThunderCats not only being the opener to that block as well as being 100% animated in Japan set a high bar for what kids would expect of programming in that block. Oddly enough, the animation director for the famous ThunderCats intro from Pacific Animation, Tsukiyuki Kubo, was also the animation director of later Toonami favorite Naruto, or at least some movies from that franchise. He was also the animation director for Bleach, which also aired on Toonami in the 2010s. That's something you know now. Interest in the property after Toonami led to a short comic run from the DC imprint Wildstorm. While the first storyline was well received as it picked up right where the cartoon ended, the other further stories got less and less popular reception. The writers for the project tried to push the adultness of the content to the point that it made people uncomfortable, killing off fan favorite Bengali while also making Chitara a victim of constant sexual assault. The only other comics that were well received in this run were the Origins books, which gave official origins for characters like Mum-Ra and for the Sword of Omens, things not expanded upon in the original show, with primarily the UK comic run giving it any thought. When that comic line failed, Warner Brothers tried to conceptualize some reboots. This ranged from a Naruto-esque series with designs by comic artist Ed McGuinness to a child rock band that transformed into the ThunderCats. I did a full video detailing it here, but the final attempt was a CGI movie that had its script leaked and some test footage done. Warner Brothers eventually scrapped all other attempts and focused on a new one. This new ThunderCats cartoon was headed by Michael Jelenic and Ethan Spalding, with Daniel Norton as the art director. The bumpers leading up to the show demonstrated the different designs and tone of the new series.
You better be very sure you want to do this, because I've got his back.
It's just as I said. There is something different about you.
I am Lion-O, Lord of the ThunderCats.
Today you will break.
ThunderCats!
ThunderCats, the special one-hour new series premiere, coming in July, only on Cartoon Network.
The new show premiered on July 29th, 2011. This show took a drastic departure from the original series. Lion-O and Tigra were brothers, with Tigra being adopted, and technology was considered a myth. And Mum-Ra was no longer specifically a devil priest, but some sort of bat creature techno-mage. On top of that, Thundera was a kingdom within Third Earth as opposed to its own planet, and the ThunderCats weren't exactly the good guys, instead having struggles with things like racism, bigotry, and imperialism. A nice nod to the original series was the voice actor of the original Lion-O, Larry Kinney, voicing King Claudius in this iteration, who was Lion-O's father. The toy line was handled by Bandai America and had 4 different sublines. There was a 6-inch line for the 2011 series, an 8-inch line for the original show, a 3 3/4 line for the 2011 show, and then a 6-inch line for the original show. Bad distribution, poor quality control, and randomly changing the scale of the classic character line without an outward reason made sure the toy line wasn't exactly a success. The show itself was also having problems. While its ratings were generally fine, they weren't getting the viewership they wanted. This was due to the show being targeted at the 6 to 11 age range, but being aired on Friday nights. And the toy sales weren't what they wanted either, because the kids that were supposed to buy the toys weren't watching the show due to its specific time slot. The show itself was animated by Studio 4C and was not cheap to produce. Warner Brothers and Cartoon Network also saw their comedy cartoons got higher ratings in general compared to their action counterparts. This was also a compounded issue with trying to license a Lego line, but that fell through. This led to the Legends of Chima being used to sweeten the deal with Warner Brothers. So, in order to save money, they decided to kill the new show. They did so by utilizing a multi-month hiatus on the second half of the first season, then randomly moving it from its Friday primetime spot to a Saturday morning spot with minimal to no promotion. It didn't help that there were no reruns airing at the time either. When an episode aired, that was the only time you were going to see it. You never saw it again on that channel within this time frame. So after the 26th episode, the show was put on an indefinite hiatus, ending on a cliffhanger. It re-aired on the revitalized Toonami, but it was too late. Despite fan efforts and a fairly large Change.org petition, the show was quietly cancelled a couple of years later. A few years ago, some details about the second season were talked about by animation director Daniel Norton. These details included a reveal that all the animal races were genetically created by Mum-Ra, and that Snarf was his first experiment, as well as immortal. It was also going to utilize a plot point from the Wildstorm comics where Lion-O would travel into the Book of Omens to train for a final battle with Mum-Ra. The most polarizing of the reveals, though, was that Pumaira, a character who was a double agent from Mum-Ra in the show itself, would be transformed into a bug monster, then killed by Tigra, driving a bigger rift between the two brothers. Whether or not you like these ideas is up to your subjective personal values. After the 2011 show was killed, ThunderCats was shelved as an animated property for years. A failed 2016 toy line from Matty Collector, due to the company itself closing its doors, happened, as well as a statue done by Connecticut that didn't meet the pre-sale demands due to Warner Brothers, for some reason, only licensing it to be sold in Southeast Asia. There was also a 2016 crossover comic with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Written by both Lloyd Goldfine and Rob David, the comic was poorly written, without much knowledge of either property, and failed to get any real critical acclaim. In 2018, a new ThunderCats cartoon was announced and headed by Victor Courtwright. This new show, called ThunderCats Roar, was a comedic take on the franchise. However, initial response to the announcement was extremely negative, even surprising Victor himself. The backlash caught Warner Brothers by surprise, further proving that they have no idea what they're doing with this property. While it was initially slotted to appear in 2019, it made its debut on the Cartoon Network app on January 10th of 2020, with the network directly airing it later on February 22nd in the same year. While it aired regularly and had plenty of promotion on the channel, it didn't get the viewership the company wanted, and it was canceled later that year with only one season under its belt. The exact reason for cancellation is unknown, but the backlash and lack of traction are speculative reasons. Between the announcement of Roar and its first airing, toy company Super 7 acquired the ThunderCats license from Warner Brothers. This included both a reaction figure line made in the vintage 5 points of articulation style and an Ultimates line that reuses the Masters of the Universe classic buck for a 7-inch figure line. In August of 2019, Wave 1 of the Ultimates went up for pre-order. There have been paid-for pre-orders of 4 waves of figures and a $450 Thunder Tank between August of 2019 and now. As of the time of this video, Super 7 has only delivered Wave 1 of the line and a glow-in-the-dark exclusive, Wave 1 having multiple flaws as well as quality control issues. Super 7 initially said customers would get 4 waves a year, but that doesn't seem to be accurate. Allegedly, Waves 3 and 2 will be out by the end of the year. We'll see. However, their reaction figure line seems to be generally on schedule. They produced 2 waves of that line and 3 LJN-inspired paint decos. There was also a Savage World ThunderCats line from Funko that was in the style of the original He-Man toy line. This had 2 waves and major quality control problems on the first wave. There have been no other waves. The Loyal Subjects also had a ThunderCats line in 2018 with a myriad of paint detail differences, even a set that paid homage to the 2011 series. As of now, the only known ThunderCats project official is an announced movie headed by Godzilla vs. Kong director Adam Wingard. Whether that will come to fruition or whether it will be good is anybody's guess at this point, but I personally don't put much stock in it. And that's it at this point. Not everything was covered, but that's the brief history of the ThunderCats property. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to throw them in the bottom and I'll be sure to get to them. I hope you enjoyed this and that it was informative to you. This channel is kinda the only channel talking about this property, so I hope you stick around. Special thanks as always to my patrons, and I hope you all continue to enjoy Iconicon, and take care.